Gender-based violence, an umbrella term referring to any acts of harm perpetrated against a person's will that are based on socially ascribed differences between men and women. There are 5 categories: sexual violence, emotional violence, physical violence, economic violence, and harmful traditional practices, most commonly FGM. On today's Wednesday Why, we unravel and perhaps answer the question, why is GBV more prevalent in women? Welcome to today's Wednesday Why. My name is Kevin Minor. You are an Unorthodox reporter. Yes, simply because I'm putting on a denim jacket, I'm wearing a t-shirt, I have no professionality over here. See, I'm not using a teleprompter, it's all coming from my head. So I'm hoping I will keep it sleek and neat. We might have takes, but that's the unorthodox point. Yeah, and hopefully you'll subscribe and like. I don't know if I should give you 3 seconds, but we don't have time, so I'll assume that you did. You see the unorthodox part. I still ask for subscribers. Back to my report on studio, which is I am the reporter, but just nice to say back to my nini. Whilst it is important to note that GBV really transcends any gender, meaning that boys and girls, women and men are vulnerable to harmful, inhumane acts of violence, the truth is GBV is more prevalent in women. In fact, it impedes them from reaching their full potential and, in worst case scenarios, simply living free from fear. Statistics show worldwide that an estimate of 1 in 3 women will or has experienced sexual and physical abuse in her lifetime. So why is this? Why is GBV more prevalent in women? Categorically, there are 4 factors that can be identified. Number 1, cultural factors, legal factors, economic factors, and political factors. So let's look at them each categorically. Number 1, cultural factors. These are basically beliefs within a society that may normalize GBV. A good example is patriarchal and sexist views that tend to support violence against women and to some extent ensure dominance of men. With such, there is a tendency to view women as objects and mere submissive beings. In our society today, this can be seen in our music. Our references, religious, traditional, and cultural beliefs that tend to sanction the physical abuse of women and ownership of their sexuality under a deluded idea or notion of entitlement and ownership of women. Number 2, legal factors. Well, the law is an ass, and while this is true, GBV has been tended to be seen in society as a form of weakness and almost shameful. In other words, gender-based violence survivors are made to feel as if they were guilty for any ordeal that might have happened to them. It's always a question of, what were you wearing? Where is the evidence? Might you have said something that provoked someone? Were you somewhere walking alone? In the words of Avan, a 17-year-old Yazidi girl who is a survivor of sexual abuse, being a girl is like being born into a prison. No place is safe, not even your own home. And you are always at the risk of being harassed, abducted, raped, or forced into marriage even when you don't want to. Due to this mere fact, gender-based violence survivors tend to remain quiet, preferring not to report their perpetrators because of the risk of being taken for granted. Number 3, economic factors. Well, a lack of economic resources within a society does make women vulnerable to gender-based violence. It creates a pattern of violence and poverty that makes it hard for victims to free themselves. To some extent, when employment and poverty affect men, there is a tendency to accentuate their masculinity by being violent against women. This has been seen in very many societies, especially in the third world countries that are experiencing poverty and that have no resources. Men tend to somehow portray their masculinity by being physically abusive to women. And lastly, number 4, political factors. Well, this is pretty obvious, and even in our society today, the lack of representation of women within the political space does make some of these issues go unnoticed. Issues such as menstrual health, gender-based violence tend to be seen as trivial matters, and it is very common to see a society in which some of these issues are looked at categorically as if to be a women's only problem. The truth is, gender-based violence is a societal issue involving both the men and women. And as much as we may overlook it, we don't have the luxury to, because today it might be someone else that you don't know. Tomorrow it could be a relative. So it is up to us to keep the conversation going and hopefully get as much information as we can. For any young person, the best route to take is, first of all, make yourself aware. Awareness precedes change. Educate yourself, educate others, keep the conversation going, and find channels where you can donate money to build and probably equip resources that will help gender-based violence survivors. I hope now you understand why GBV is more prevalent amongst women. Kindly do more research. If you have any questions, ask me down below. If you have any suggestion as to which we can create content that will push this past the 16 days of activism, I'd love to hear from you. So do leave me a comment down below. Also, thank you for your feedback that has been coming through. I appreciate that. Remember to subscribe and like, and be here next week for another Wednesday Why.